poignant and difficult reflections on this National Day for Truth and Reconciliation.
Inequities persist, and we share a lifelong responsibility to address them.
And why denialism still lingers over the reality of residential schools. The U.S. President's Gaza peace plan, how Palestinians and Israelis feel about the proposal. Alberta teachers reject the latest contract offer, when they could strike, and how the provincial government plans to support parents.
Who's going to take care of my son?
Plus, reconciliation and recipes.
It's more than just a meal.
The Indigenous entrepreneurs reclaiming their culture through cuisine.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Nitu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Canadians are marking the 5th National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. From coast to coast to coast, ceremonies confronted the painful legacy of residential schools and honored survivors and the children who never came home. On Parliament Hill, the national commemorative gathering brought together hundreds of people, including survivors, Indigenous artists, leaders and dignitaries. As David Akin reports, the event carried a renewed call for reconciliation and a push for meaningful action.
This solemn ceremony and ones like it across the country have a purpose.
Today, I call on every Canadian to renew their commitment to reconciliation.
So says Canada's first and only Indigenous Governor General.
Inequities persist, and we share a lifelong responsibility to address them.
Mary Simon has been the GG for all 5 National Days for Truth and Reconciliation, but this is the first for Prime Minister Mark Carney.
On this National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, we honor survivors and the children who never returned home.
The date September 30th was chosen because this is the time of the year when Indigenous children were taken from their homes and forced to go to residential schools. That was Ripa Evitt Carlton's life for 10 years as a girl growing up on Baffin Island.
The impacts of residential schools and colonization continue to affect our lives today.
As in other years, attendees at the national ceremony on Parliament Hill placed children's shoes at the front of the stage, a symbolic act to honor the 150,000 children who were sent away between the 1880s and the 1990s, and as many as 6,000, possibly more, died or disappeared after being sent to a residential school.
Holding these little moccasins. We should remember these children and the lives they gave so that we could move forward as a nation.
Establishing this National Day of Remembrance and Reflection, this national holiday, was one of the 94 calls to action recommended by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Well, the Commission's report was released 10 years ago. And of the 94 calls to action in that report, just 13 have been completed. That's according to the Assembly of First Nations. And the AFN is now encouraging this new Prime Minister to speed up progress towards reconciliation. Nitu.
Okay, David Akin in Ottawa. Thanks, David. One of those 94 calls to action is about how Canada commemorates Indigenous history. Today, the federal government held a ceremony highlighting the national historic significance of the former Assiniboia Residential School in Winnipeg. Plaques unveiled at the site honor survivors and recognize the legacy of the residential school system. The Assiniboia Residential School was the first urban residential high school in Manitoba, operating from 1958 to 1973. More than 1,000 students from dozens of communities across several provinces attended. The stories of survivors contribute to the ongoing process of truth, reconciliation, and remembrance in Canada. The experience of one woman in BC inspired an entire movement across this country known as Orange Shirt Day. Our Melissa Ridgen speaks to the author and activist about her story and the growing skepticism in search for answers about the children who never came home.
Phyllis Webstad was 6 years old when her grandmother took her shopping for clothes to start kindergarten at a residential school near Williams Lake, BC.
I remember choosing a bright orange shirt, and it was bright and exciting, just like how I felt to be going to school for the first time. When I got to the mission, to the residential school, my shirt was taken away, and I don't have any memory of ever wearing it again.
Webstad's story started the orange shirt movement.
Put that energy towards helping.
Webstad recently co-authored Decolonization and Me, exploring healing and individual responsibility around truth and reconciliation. She says it comes at a time when skepticism and denialism fester.
There's a lot of misunderstandings and a lot of hate and a lot of, denialism out there. And what I say is the story is this long. This is the whole truth from here to here. And a person may understand a quarter, a third, a half, maybe a little more than a half, but the rest they make up, and that's where racism comes from. This book is an attempt to fill in that gap of understanding.
The first step is to understand.
Raymond Frogner is head of archives and works with First Nations across the country to identify children who died at these schools and locate where they're buried, including the Tsuut'ina Nation, which relocated graves from the Dunbow Residential School in southern Alberta.
There was a river that runs by the school where there was a burial site, and because of soil erosion, remains from the burial site actually fell into the river. They literally moved remains from the burial site to a second site that was on safer ground. And the amount of ceremony and protocol that was involved in that meant that it took well over a week to do that move. It's not something that's in the distant past. It's relevant history to today.
To anyone demanding a public spectacle to prove something, Frogner has this to say on Truth and Reconciliation Day.
It's not exactly a common practice in any culture. So to demand that, we're going to start removing remains to prove what? We have so much evidence in our archives indicating loss, indicating abuse of children, malnutrition, lack of housing, lack of family care, that it's hard to believe that we actually need to disinter the remains to prove that these experiences were as bad as they say they were.
Melissa Ridgen, Global News, Winnipeg.
There is some support for survivors. A 24-hour crisis line is available for anyone experiencing pain or distress as a result of their residential school experience. You can call toll-free and speak in confidence at 1-866-925-4419. The U.S. government faces its first shutdown in nearly 7 years. The government will shut down at midnight if the Senate does not pass a measure to extend funding. A standoff over health care spending is threatening to grind services to a halt and send thousands of federal workers home. U.S. President Donald Trump has spent 8 months slashing the size of the government and is warning of irreversible layoffs if a shutdown goes ahead. Hundreds of U.S. military leaders were abruptly summoned to Virginia for a highly unusual meeting today. They met with President Trump and his newly renamed Secretary of War. The rare gathering is part of Trump's attempts to rebrand the armed forces. As Jackson Prosco reports, military leaders were told to support the administration's agenda or leave.
The Pentagon's top brass sat silently as the defense secretary and president outlined a stark new vision for America's armed forces.
America is under invasion from within. We're under invasion from within.
We lost our way. We became the woke department, but not anymore.
Instead of focusing on the battlefield, they were roped into the culture wars and lectured about new physical standards for everyone in uniform.
If that means no women qualify for some combat jobs, so be it. It's tiring to look out at combat formations, or really any formation, and see fat troops.
The generals and admirals were told to leave if they don't like it.
If the words I'm speaking today are making your heart sink, then you should do the honorable thing and resign.
It was the commander-in-chief who truly shattered the norms.
I am with you, I support you, and as president, I have your backs 100%.
In front of a military that serves country, not one party, President Donald Trump launched into a politically charged speech.
We should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military.
He made it clear he expects to deploy more troops to American cities against American citizens, as he has already done in Washington, Los Angeles, and Portland.
They're very unsafe places, and we're going to straighten them out one by one. And this is going to be a major part for some of the people in this room.
Domestic use of the military remains largely unconstitutional. Coupled with Trump's blatant political message, it leaves military leaders in a tough spot.
They take orders from the commander-in-chief. On the other hand, they've sworn an oath of allegiance to the Constitution. It's going to put them sort of in the middle. It's going to make them uncomfortable.
Trump and Hegseth have made it clear they aren't worried about that as they take their political fight to America's fighting forces. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
President Trump has warned Hamas has just 3 or 4 days to accept his Gaza peace plan or face what he called a very sad end. The plan has the backing of several countries, including Canada. Hamas calls it an imposed guardianship and says it will study the proposal before responding. Vincent McAviney reports on the reaction from those caught in the crosshairs.
Daybreak in Gaza and the clock is ticking. Hamas has 3 days to respond to the peace plan proposed by President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, starting with Hamas's release of all hostages, leaving Palestinians skeptical. If they release all the hostages at once, then we are finished. Trump is planning on how he can take a hold of Gaza and turn it into resorts. If they wanted to solve the war, they would have solved it a long time ago. We are the victims here. The whole world is watching us today as we get slaughtered. Prime Minister Mark Carney has broadly endorsed the plan, along with the leaders of the UK, EU and Turkey. If all sides agree, the US-sponsored plan would set the stage for an immediate ceasefire, release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails, Hamas laying down its weapons, and the introduction of a new transitional government. If Hamas doesn't, President Trump says he'll allow Israel to continue its deadly campaign.
We'll let them go and do what they have to do. They can do it pretty easily. Hamas is either going to be doing it or not, and if it's not, it's going to be a very sad end.
In Jerusalem, Israelis broadly welcomed the plan.
I think it's a great move. I just wonder if Hamas will agree to dismantling their weapons and leaving Gaza.
Great day for Israel. I don't see anyone from right to left who's going to go against it. The only question is now if Hamas will approve.
For families of the remaining 20 hostages still alive, an anxious wait. For those like Udi Goren, whose cousin Tal Haimi died in Hamas captivity, they hope to finally receive her remains.
There is some light at the end of the tunnel, because what we've seen yesterday is that all the Arab countries that have been involved in this, the Bay country, the mediators, they all back this deal up.
After being officially recognized by Canada, France and Australia, among other UN states this month, Trump's plan leaves the door open for a Palestinian state. A push Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has already ruled out. Vincent McAviney, Global News, London.
A second detainee has died following last week's sniper attack outside a Dallas immigration office. Family members say 32-year-old Miguel Angel Garcia Hernandez, a house painter, father of 4, was taken off of life support after being shot 4 times while shackled in a government van. He came to the U.S. from Mexico as a child and had been in custody since August. Officials say the gunman intended to target federal officers last Wednesday, but his only victims were detainees. A third victim remains in hospital. And 120 Iranians, most who entered the U.S. illegally through Mexico, will be deported to Iran over the next couple of days after the Trump administration reportedly reached a deal to return them. Iran says under the agreement, some 400 Iranian nationals are expected to be deported from the U.S. Alberta teachers to walk off the job. Coming up, the looming job action and anxiety among parents. Nigel Wright, former Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Stephen Harper and longtime Onex executive, has died at 62. The Toronto-based private equity giant announced Wright's passing today, calling him an outstanding leader and a consummate gentleman. Wright spent decades at Onex before serving as Harper's Chief of Staff in 2011. He resigned 2 years later after paying more than $90,000 of Senator Mike Duffy's expenses, a move the Ethics Commissioner later ruled violated federal conflict of interest rules, and one Wright said he would live to regret. More than 700,000 students in Alberta are scrambling to find backup plans after the Alberta Teachers Union rejected a contract offer from the province, setting up a strike that could begin Monday. Skylar Peters joins us from Calgary. Skylar, how are parents reacting?
Well, Alberta parents have been preparing for the possibility of this teacher strike since the start of the young school year. But now that disruption, which would begin next Monday, October 6th, is starting to feel inevitable.
I'm trying to call my mom, like, who's going to take care of my son? I'm going to feel like other parents who are at home as well with their kids, because I won't be providing the learning that their teacher will be.
89.5% of teachers who voted rejected the province's latest contract offer over the weekend. The union saying the agreement didn't do enough to address funding issues, class sizes, or growing classroom complexities.
You see these numbers here that are on the vote, the number of teachers who rejected this deal. They're not going to go back and look at something that is very similar to this.
The province says it will support families, both with an at-home learning toolkit and a $30 daily stipend during the strike for every student under the age of 12.
During the strike, unused educational grants will be redirected to helping families. That money will be used to support families as they determine how to navigate life with schools closed.
Premier Danielle Smith says there are no plans to bring government back and force teachers back to work. Now, a strike could affect how the rest of the school year looks, whether that's shortened holidays or continuing on into what typically would be summer break. Education Minister Dimitrios Nicolaides says those details still need to be worked out with the ATA. But first, the more pressing matter at hand is finding a deal that both sides are happy with and returning Alberta teachers and students back into the classroom. Neetu?
Skylar Peters in Calgary. Thanks, Skylar. Ahead, the race to recover students trapped by debris after a deadly school collapse in Indonesia. Rescuers in Indonesia are racing to free dozens of students trapped under rubble after a school collapsed. At least 3 students are known to have died and nearly 100 people have been hospitalized, some critically. Indonesia's disaster mitigation agency says the school had an unstable foundation that couldn't support the weight of the construction above. A second Ukrainian man has been arrested, accused of being involved in the Nord Stream gas pipeline attack in 2022. The man, detained in Poland on a European arrest warrant, was allegedly part of a group that dove down to the Baltic seabed and planted explosives. 2 multi-billion-dollar pipelines that carried Russian gas to Europe were severely damaged. A Ukrainian man was arrested in Italy last month, suspected of collusion and sabotage.
Uncle Sean's raspberry dandelion, Harold's chamomile pear, which is my dad.
Next, appetite for change, the journey to reclaim Indigenous culture through cuisine. As people across the country reflect on this National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, some of the strongest calls for economic change are coming from small Indigenous restaurants and caterers. One of the Commission's calls to action, number 92, urges companies to support Indigenous businesses. I visited one in Vancouver and another inside a National Historic Site in BC that was once central to colonial trade. And I heard the stories of 2 entrepreneurs who are using food to reclaim space and inspire action year-round. Inside a small cafe in Langley, BC.
This one is just jam-packed full of antioxidants.
Healing comes in many forms, from jams and bannock to lemonade and teas.
The raspberry leaf, yeah, that's amazing. It's really also good for pregnant women.
Co-founder Sarah Mikons-Miro blends plant medicine into her recipes and names each of her jams after an ancestor.
My brother's, Uncle Sean's, raspberry dandelion, Harold's chamomile pear, which is my dad.
At Ancestor Cafe, food is medicine and a message, a way to share Indigenous art and stories in a place shaped by colonialism.
We're out here and we're shining and we're doing some pretty amazing, beautiful things. And to be noticed is nice, but also just realizing that it doesn't have to just be September 30th.
A daughter of a 60s scoop survivor, Miro says this is about reclamation, including where she chose to open her business.
This is literally ground zero for colonization in BC. But after talking to elders and friends and family, I realized it was our responsibility to take up these types of spaces.
Her mentor, Inez Cook, shares that mission. Cook, a former flight attendant who co-founded Salmon and Bannock Restaurant in Vancouver.
Every dish has a story. All of our team has stories. It's more than just a meal.
Cook, a 60s scoop survivor, says the kitchen helped her reconnect to her culture.
Once I kind of came full circle and decided to open up an Indigenous restaurant and celebrate my own heritage, it was definitely a full circle moment, and that's how I reconnected to my roots.
As the country marks National Truth and Reconciliation Day, these entrepreneurs say the work goes far beyond one day. It's a daily practice in business, community, and in action. And that is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Neetu Garcha. We leave you tonight with more sights and sounds from this National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Thanks so much for watching.
It's never too late to learn. It's never too late to look into the TRCs and to read what happened.
Seeing everybody wearing an orange shirt really means a lot. To me, it means like showing respect to Indigenous families and communities.
The kids that didn't make it home, we have to remember them. And this is why today I have to take this off and I will give it to my grandson to remember.